Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Inglaterra. Hoy voy a compartir leyendo con este libro, Life on Earth, by David Attenborough. Muy interesante. Este es muy famoso desde el año 1979 porque fue una serie en la televisión muy famoso porque casi el primero que visita cualquier parte del mundo para mostrar la diversidad de tipo de plantas, animales, insectos, toda la vida natural en el mundo. Hoy, porque yo reencontré este libro aquí, en mi biblioteca aquí, yo reencontré estas y estoy otra vez disfrutando leyendo. Voy a compartir en parte con este libro con ustedes. Ese es el tema de hoy. So, hello again from England. Today I'm going to share with you a reading from this book. Right, there we go. Life on Earth by David Attenborough. This was published originally in 1979 to go with a TV series that came out the same year. Very, very famous here. I remember it quite well. It's been on television many times since, and this gentleman now, Sir David Attenborough, is very famous here. But this show was a real a revolutionary series of its time in the way that it showed us the wonders of the natural world, all the forests, the creatures, the fish, the birds, the whole thing. And he talks about how different species have changed over time, how they've adapted to different habitats, and with some really tremendous photography, which was the thing that really made it as a TV series, because you could visit all these places from the comfort of your armchair and see these marvellous things going on. So, happily for me, I kept the book from all these years back, and it's one of the ones I have here in my library of books here. So I was revisiting this a bit today, so I thought I'd share with you a bit from the opening chapter of this book, because it's an interesting topic, and see how much you understand. So in this chapter, the author's talking a bit about the infinite variety of different species of animals, insects, birds, etc. Make some reference to Darwin's theory of evolution and how that helps us nowadays understand the natural world around us. That's what he's talking about. So, chapter 1 is called The Infinite Variety. It is not difficult to discover an unknown animal. Spend a day in the tropical forest of South America, turning over logs, looking beneath bark, sifting through the moist litter of leaves, followed by an evening shining a mercury lamp on a white screen. And one way and another, you will collect hundreds of different kinds of small creatures. Moths, caterpillars, spiders, long-nosed bugs, luminous beetles, harmless butterflies disguised as wasps, wasps shaped like ants, sticks that walk, leaves that open wings and fly. The variety will be enormous, and one of these creatures will almost certainly be undescribed by science. The difficulty will be to find scientists who know enough about the groups concerned to be able to single out the new one. Now no one can say just how many species of animals there are in these greenhouse, humid, dimly lit jungles. They contain the richest and most varied assemblage of animal and plant life to be found anywhere on Earth. Not only are there many major categories of creatures, monkeys, rodents, spiders, hummingbirds, butterflies. But most of these types exist in many different forms. There are over 40 different species of parrot, over 70 different monkeys, 300 hummingbirds, and tens of thousands of butterflies. If you're not careful, you can even be bitten by 100 different kinds of mosquito. In 1832, a young Englishman, Charles Darwin, 24 years old and naturalist on HMS Beagle, a brig sent by the Admiralty in London on a surveying voyage around the world, came to such a forest outside Rio de Janeiro. In one day, in one small area, he collected 68 different species of small beetle. That there should be such a variety of species in one kind of creature astounded him. He had not been searching specially for them, so that, as he wrote in his journal, it is sufficient to disturb the composure of an entomologist's mind to look forward to the future dimensions of a complete catalogue. The conventional view of his time was that all species were immutable and that each had been individually and separately created by God. Now, Darwin was far from being an atheist. He had, after all, taken a degree in divinity in Cambridge, but he was deeply puzzled by this enormous multiplicity of forms. During the next 3 years, the Beagle sailed down the east coast of South America, rounded Cape Horn, and came north again up the coast of Chile. The expedition then sailed out into the Pacific until, 600 miles from the mainland, they came to the lonely archipelago of the Galapagos. Here, Darwin's questions about the creation of species recurred, for in these islands he found fresh variety. He was fascinated to discover that the Galapagos animals bore a general resemblance to those that he had seen on the mainland, but differed from them in detail. There were cormorants, black, long-necked diving birds like those that fly low along Brazilian rivers, but here in the Galapagos their wings were so small and with such stunted feathers that they had lost the power of flight. There were iguanas, large lizards with a crest of scales along their backs. Those on the continent climbed trees and ate leaves. Here on the islands, where there was little vegetation, one species fed on seaweed and clung to rocks among the surging waves with unusually long and powerful claws. There were tortoises, very similar to the mainland forms, except that these were many times bigger, giants that a man could ride. The English vice-governor of the Galapagos told Darwin that even within the archipelago there was variety. The tortoises on each island were slightly different, so that it was possible to tell from which island they came from. Those that lived on relatively well-watered islands, where there was ground vegetation to be cropped, had a gently curving front edge to their shells just above the neck. But those that came from arid islands and had to crane their necks in order to reach branches of cactus or leaves of trees had much longer necks, at a high peak to the front of their shells that enabled them to stretch their necks almost vertically upwards. The suspicion grew in Darwin's mind that species were not fixed forever. Perhaps one could change into another. Maybe thousands of years ago, birds and reptiles from continental South America had reached the Galapagos, ferried on rafts of vegetation that float down the rivers and out to sea. Once there, they had changed as generation succeeded generation, to suit their new homes until they became their present species. The differences between them and their mainland cousins were only small, but if such changes had taken place, was it not possible that over many millions of years, the cumulative effects on a dynasty of animals would be so great that they could bring about major transformations? Maybe fish had developed muscular fins and crawled onto land to become amphibians. Maybe amphibians in their turn had developed watertight skins and become reptiles. And maybe even some ape-like creatures had stood upright and become the ancestors of man. In truth, the idea was not wholly a new one. Many others before Darwin had suggested that all life on Earth was interrelated. Darwin's revolutionary insight was to perceive the mechanism that brought these changes about. By doing so, he replaced a philosophical speculation with a detailed description of a process supported by an abundance of evidence that could be tested and verified, and the reality of evolution could no longer be denied. Put briefly, his argument was this: all individuals of the same species are not identical. In one clutch of eggs, for example, a giant tortoise, there will be some hatchlings which, because of their genetic constitution, will develop longer necks than others. In times of drought, they will be able to reach leaves and so survive. Their brothers and sisters, with shorter necks, will starve and die. So those best fitted to their surroundings will be selected and be able to transmit their characteristics to their offspring. After a great number of generations, tortoises on the arid islands will have longer necks than those on the watered islands. And so one species will have given rise to another. And this concept did not become clear in Darwin's mind until long after he had left the Galapagos. For 25 years, he painstakingly amassed evidence to support it. Not until 1859, when he was 48 years old, did he publish it. And even then, he was driven to do so only because another younger naturalist, Alfred Wallace, working in Southeast Asia, had formulated the same idea. Darwin called the book in which he set out his theory in detail The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Now, since that time, the theory of natural selection has been debated and tested, refined, qualified and elaborated. Later discoveries about genetics, molecular biology, population dynamics and behaviour have given it new dimensions. It remains the key to our understanding of the natural world, and it enables us to recognise that life has a long and continuous history during which organisms, both plant and animal, have changed generation by generation as they colonised all parts of the world. Well, there we go. I'll leave it there. So that's a flavour of the first chapter from this book, which, if you can still find it, I think it's still in print, is a very interesting and quite easy to read, in the sense that it's not full of scientific terminology, quite easy to read account of the natural history of our one and only planet. So I hope you enjoy this one. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre. But for now, we'll say cheerio.